So welcome everyone who is streaming into this after the fact. Today we have law librarian Stephen Wilson, our Associate Director for Copyright and Research Services. We also have two instructors from the School of Law, Jean Mangan and Thomas Caudry. And we have Marion Samuel, who is from UGA Main Library. And this group of people are here today to talk with us and to each other about open access. It is Open Access Week 2021, and we are recording this on Monday, October 25th to kick off the week. We know everyone is short on time, so we're going to deliver an asynchronous video to you that you can watch anytime and hear about the university's grant for creating your own affordable course materials. Jean is actually one of those recipients, and she and Stephen have worked together on her legal writing manual using that grant. Thomas is also literally on the verge of publishing his own open textbook. Can't wait to hear about that from you. And Marion is here as a representative of the group that is working to get recipients, to get applications for people who will be the next round of recipients for this affordable grant. So she can share with us about that. So looking forward to talking with all of you today. Just to get things sort of kick-started, I feel like what's a super important question is that probably impacts all four of you is why open access? I mean, like, what does that mean to you? Why did you choose to, work on the books that you did, particularly Jean and Thomas, and Stephen and Marion? What does that mean to you? And what's so important about open access for our viewers who might not know?
Well, I'll start. So I've been advocating for open access or open educational resources for a while now, primarily because I have been working in the copyright and academic space, and copyright and academia sort of bumps into directly bumps into open access rights issues and open educational rights issues. And so I sort of initially got interested in it, I guess, like a lot of people do in similar space, with hearing about sort of the benefits that open access to educational information, open access to research information provides. There's a lot of great benefits that you'll hear. So for instance, it can extend the reach of researchers' work by making it more easily available to people. It can defray some of the costs that both students and university libraries face by putting those costs elsewhere, or by just taking away the access barriers that that exist. And then over time, I started paying attention to other arguments for open access, open educational resources, including providing more equitable access to information resources or educational resources. And this is I would consider this equity on many different levels. So not just the economic level, which is making this information, these educational resources available to people who can't afford them otherwise, but also spreading the availability of these things outside of just the academic institutions or academic environment, to places where you may not even have been able to access them at all before. I think it's easy for us in academia to forget that most of the world doesn't have access to the same sort of resources that we do easily at our fingertips. And part of the reason for this is just because of the access barriers, the cost barriers, or the even availability barriers. And so open access, just philosophically, is designed to remove those barriers, to provide greater degree of access. So I've been sort of advocating in this space for a long time, and talking to people about the reasons for open access and open educational resources. I suppose that's how Jean found her way to me when she was first exploring the Provost Grant and developing her own book. So maybe she could talk a little bit about how she got interested in that.
Yeah, so Stephen's right. I had no idea what OER was when I first started, but I had been toying with the idea that $120 textbook for legal writing was too much. To me, there's nothing. Legal writing is a fantastic subject for people to study, but you're not going to learn everything from a book, no matter what the book is. And I had tried to pull from different chapters of other legal writing books and do a course packet from Belgium. But the cost of that ended up being the same as a textbook over the course of 2 semesters. So I said, okay, well, I am trying to reduce this cost because I'm hoping that the students will see that if I care about the cost, that they'll understand I am paying attention to them specifically. And if I write it myself, how little I knew at the time what I was signing up for when I said that, but if I write it myself, then it's in the same voice that I teach in. And so we're all going to have the same nomenclature that we're using about what legal writing paradigm are we using? How are we describing how we take facts from past cases and look at the current situation? We can establish, basically, if we're all using the same vocabulary, then we can more quickly be discussing the ideas behind those because we're not having to agree on terms. So that's kind of what got me into it. And now that I did the first edition through the Affordable Materials Grant. I updated the second edition through an Affordable Learning Georgia grant. And I'm actually now working on a third edition to be able to add in more examples. So now what I really like about the open educational resource model is students can provide feedback to me that I can then incorporate for the next year. I can actually, it can really be an interactive work in a way that the students can see that I'm listening to what they're saying and they're benefiting future students. And so I know there's a lot of like people talking right now about doing renewable assignments for students. I'm not to that level yet in operating in that open access space, but I do think that for students to see that what they say has an effect helps them maybe buy into the class a little bit more.
So what you would say is, I think that there are additional educational benefits to using OER beyond just economic benefits. That you think your students additionally benefit from being more engaged in almost the development of the course by allowing sort of for a more flexible educational tool such as your OER book.
Absolutely, 100%. The other thing that I really like about having put together my own book is, I sound so silly when I say my own book. I hate saying that. But what I do like is I've had to really think about why am I presenting each piece this way? So now I, as an instructor, feel really comfortable talking to students and thinking about 10 different ways that we can look at it, because I did all that when I very naively said, oh, I'll just write one. So there's just so many things I have found beneficial about it, and that students, it's a way for me to tell students that their voice matters and that I'm hearing them and that they are a near peer status. And that gives them confidence for us to have conversations about writing that then enhances the quality of their writing. And it's all just very happy kumbaya. I want to have jazz hands about it.
That's great. Now, do you think that that will extend beyond your course by having your students, obviously by having your students invested in the development of this book, it helps them in this individual course. How do you think that translates outside of your course, or have you thought about this at all?
Well, there's a few different ways I hope it translates. The first is that students feel like they have a resource to go back to. They've actually used the resource enough to where it's something they'd want to refer to as 2Ls and 3Ls. I also pull different chapters from it to assign to my upper level drafting classes and even to my undergrad class. And so it's not just my 1Ls using it. And again, same benefits of I can get feedback, it's free, it's saying it in the way I'm looking at it. I have hopes that maybe it would be something that schools would consider adopting. Again, just trying to think about access to legal education. One of the really big barriers is cost. And if you look at a $120 textbook, you think $120, but then when you use student loans to buy that textbook and extend out the interest over that, the cost to a student is a lot. And I guess I just think that there's, I think we're moving away from, right? We're not in Gutenberg's book press anymore. Like, we're not in 1450s. We are now in a world where information can be shared instantaneously. And so rather than putting valuing it in terms of how much money can I make, I would prefer to see how many people have used my book to learn better and to feel confident about what they're doing. And I think if we could shift how we prioritize and value knowledge, and understand that knowledge is really easy to share, and so we need to value it in a different way, I feel like we'd all be a lot better off.
Great. So Thomas, how do you think that that compares with your reasons for getting into the OER game?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So, definitely plenty of overlap, and that's not surprising because Jean and I have talked about this as well. And she led the way in applying for one of these grants, and I was very pleased to get one myself the year after she got one. That led me to create my torts casebook, which is about to be hot off the digital press. I'll probably launch it into the universe maybe tomorrow if all goes to plan, to kind of time it with Open Access Week. So fingers crossed. But yeah, so similarly, affordability was the main initial driver for me. And as expensive as Jean's legal writing book was, that she would have previously had to use, the doctrinal books tend to be double or triple the cost of that. And so, I did some rough maths when I was looking at this. And I think in my 1L torts class, I have around 60 or so students. The new textbook was about $295. There was a new first edition, like a new edition coming out, so they wouldn't have really been able to buy it used. So we're looking at about $17,000 that the entire class would spend on just their torts casebooks. So multiply that by 6 to cover the 6 doctrinal mandatory classes that you have to take in 1L. You're looking at over 100,000. Multiply that for the entire entering class of 1Ls, we're at over 300,000. And before long, I realized that if we're just looking at the students that are currently enrolled at UGA Law right now, we're approaching $1 million in 1L casebook expenses that they made. And that just struck me as fundamentally antithetical to the idea that we are trying to do something at UGA and hopefully more broadly about affordability and access in education. And look, I don't want to be naive about this. The casebooks that exist out there are of tremendous value, and people put a lot of hard work and energy into creating them. And there are costs involved in publishing and printing casebooks that cause some of those costs. I don't mean to suggest that there's no value out there in the many casebooks that have led the way for me to create mine. And I've been really inspired and influenced by people who have made them beforehand. But I still really felt like there was more that I could at least be doing to try and make it easier for my students, and maybe for other students as well, if other people will adopt this casebook. And I guess that also leads me to the second reason, which is the adaptability of the open access model, and particularly using like a Creative Commons license, was really appealing to me because I felt like sometimes certain perspectives were often missing from traditional casebooks, particularly grappling with the relationship between torts and certain social justice issues and questions of race and gender, ability, class, sexual orientation. Again, not that they're totally absent from the existing kind of canon, but it was often harder to find good materials to bring out those issues that were really important for me and that I felt were really important for my students to engage with. So I was able to create those materials. And now I can share this in a way that other instructors who maybe want to bring in their own perspectives and pick up on the blind spots that are surely in my work can adapt what I've done and be able to bring that to their classroom as well. And I say in my casebook, just email me. If you want a Word version of this instead of the PDF, just email me and I'll send it to you, and you can copy and paste and do whatever you want with it. So that's really exciting for me. And then I guess just 2 other slightly related points. One is thinking about accessibility, not just in terms of accessibility to legal education, but in terms of engaging with the material. Books can be quite one-dimensional in terms of the way in which you can use them. But being able to do this through like a PDF that allows for different sorts of engagement with the material. I'm eager to think more about the ways in which I might be able to make these materials more accessible to different learning styles and different people, and their ability to engage with different types of materials. And so that's something I'm excited about. And then I guess last but not least, the environment, right? It's like a tiny little thing that I can do, but if all of my students go without printed casebooks for a year, and if that can, feed into other classrooms, and we can, not be printing quite so much and be engaging with things a little bit more on that level, I figured that was a win as well. So all of those things kind of went into it and made me excited to create this material.
Yeah, one thing you and I talked about at another time was about accessibility, about equity related to accessibility, right? Which is that by producing these materials not as a giant print book, but instead as an electronic resource, you said it allows people to engage in it in different ways, but it may just make it easier for them to use these tools, right? If you have visual disabilities, they may be able to access them using screen readers or some other tools in a variety of different ways. But I was wondering, have you thought about, so your book I think is great. I'm not knocking it anyway, but it is, sort of a print analog currently.
Yeah.
Have you thought about trying to do anything more dynamic? People experiment with sort of OER course material design, though I think it's still fairly rudimentary. Have you thought about trying to incorporate any other sort of dynamic tools into your book and the next editions?
Definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, the way that I've kind of thought about this is that I wanted to try and strike a balance between trying to do something that the students would appreciate, but not think of as so fundamentally different to the traditional casebook that they might think that I was giving them a substandard product. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be too radical too early and have them assume that this type of a material is inferior from the thing that they spend several $100s on in all of their other 1L classes. So I wanted to try and strike that balance. So what I did was I have a liquid syllabus up on my website that accompanies the casebook. And again, if anyone else wants to adopt the casebook, I share that with them and they can adapt that too. But the liquid syllabus, basically just a live syllabus that I can update on the website, links to all sorts of supplementary materials, whether that's video materials, podcasts, popular media resources as well. All of that, I think, increases accessibility and the diversity of content that students are getting while being fundamentally keyed to the thing that I want them to think of on equal footing to the casebooks that they're having to spend all the money on, the physical casebook. Maybe in time, I will feel confident in presenting this to them in a format that also will allow for engagement within the text or within the material along those other lines. But this way, I sort of hoped to strike that balance, and I made a conscious decision to call it a casebook, right? It's not a course pack, it's not an e-book, it's not it's not a PDF, it's a casebook. You're getting a casebook like you get in the other classes. This one just happens to be free, and you can engage with it in all of these other ways. And also, here's the website for these other materials.
So I think that's a really important point, and that I want to highlight, which is that sort of the OER for your course is more than just the PDF print analog casebook. It's actually the whole sort of environment that you've created, including your what you call liquid syllabus, which I think is a great term. But that enables students to engage with this materials in a variety of different ways, and also that it I like that it preserves sort of the tradition, particularly for people, not just students, but people who may want to adopt OER materials for their courses, but who feel that jumping into something too changey is a little bit too much for them. So I really like that, and that as time goes forward, you can use this sort of OER environment that you've created, again with the casebook and with your supplementary materials of the syllabus. You can sort of shift them and change them as you feel more comfortable or as time progresses. I think that's great.
Absolutely. And I mean, just one tiny supplement point on that. I mean, even within the thing that looks more like a traditional casebook, I've included way more photos than I had ever seen in any other casebook. And I got some great feedback from students who were like, this is great. Like, there's a photo that goes along with every case. And when I'm trying to remember which case is which, sometimes just the photo is the thing that springs out at me. And oh yeah, of course I remember the facts of Paul's graph now. There was an image of fireworks exploding or whatever else it may be. And so even within that more traditional model, there are ways through something like the Creative Commons photo database to just add more material in that can be freely shared.
That's great. That's excellent. So Marianne, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this Provost Grant that Jean and Thomas have both mentioned, but we haven't really, addressed what it is.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to see all this enthusiasm about OERs. And the UGA libraries have, in connection with the provost, been working since 2019 to initiate a grant program that is administered through the provost's office. It awards $5,000 to a faculty member who is interested in developing their own open education resource, or a cost less than $40. And basically what we look at in terms of the awarding of the grant is the most impact that the particular content is going to have. So we look at number of students per dollar, but again, that's not dispositive. I mean, we look at other things like the creativity that will go into the content that'll be created. Eligibility is for full-time faculty at UGA. That includes academic professionals, instructors, lecturers, assistant, associate, and full professors. So there's a pretty broad inclusion of who can apply and get the grant. It's also available for individuals or groups of instructors, so such as what Jean and Stephen have done. The deadline is December 1st, 2021, and the applicants will be notified of the funding status by January 2022. So I just want to also add in to the part of the conversation about adaptability and cost, is because I mostly deal with the science part of campus, and like the law schools dealing with case books that cost in the several hundreds, science textbooks are enormously costly. Chemistry, biology texts, math books, several $100s at the very least. So the campus is really widely aware of this issue and trying to address it through the Provost Grant, and also the Affordable Learning Georgia, which Jean had mentioned earlier on when she spoke. This is a statewide program, and actually the state of Georgia is a leader in OER development. I mean, you may not know this, but we're in a pretty good place because our legislature is very sensitive to the issues of student affordability and so forth. So we're in a actually very good place for developing OERs. Does that help kind of address what you had in mind, Stephen?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I will say as well that both Jean and Thomas, the OER that you've developed are incredibly high quality. And sometimes there's a perception that OER resources are of lower quality because of zero or low cost, right? There's a perception that if you pay more for something, that means it has that value that you paid for it. But that's just simply not true. And in fact, what Marianne was saying about Georgia being a leader in this, it's that.
But Stephen, I wanted to touch a little bit on the access barriers you mentioned at the beginning and about how these grants have the ability to help. When Marianne was talking about the sciences, it made me think about the actual physical barriers themselves and kind of like paywall issues that a lot of people can come up against. And actually right now I'm working through for my criminal law drafting class. How can I get access to court documents to use as examples for students when right now in Georgia, you have to pay 50 cents a page to save it or to print it? And so thinking beyond just saving students money on their books, but also thinking about the different things that we as academics have access to or funding that we can ask for that then would let students benefit from real life court documents that otherwise they're going to have to pay, tons of money for, if they can even access it. Because some things like for PACER, the federal e-filing system is you have to be an attorney to even get on there, to even have the ability to pay anything. So that's just another kind of thing that I think OER has the ability to do, is to invest the money on the front end to create high quality products that people can then use because they've been curated by someone like Thomas or like me, who really, it's a labor of love as much as anything else. So I just wanted to mention that.
I mean, I think that raises another really important point that sort of OER doesn't create, but it enables, is that, you know, we've learned a lot over time about how students learn, and that students learn in a variety of different ways, right? And ultimately what you're saying is that you think your students would benefit from this, you know, from these document types that they really just don't have any access to and probably haven't had much in the past, right? And then to what Thomas is saying about his book, that just even by providing simple pictures to provide additional context helps some of his students in ways that, you know, helps them learn. Some students learn in ways that they may not otherwise have. Which is just sort of another side benefit of both, you know, creating your own educational resources, but then making them open and available to use for others. Do you have anybody have anything else to add?
I can chime in on this topic. I just think it's so exciting that people are finally also getting excited about things that maybe don't take like the traditional or legacy format that we've just accepted for so long. And I mean, you know, how long have we had the technology to do sort of a liquid syllabus or a non-traditional set of course materials, whether it's a casebook or like a packet or whatever you want to call it, where it could live anywhere and serve any purpose for your students that it needs to. And I think it's the accessibility angle is actually really huge for me, because I am one of those people that is like a big visual learner. What I will remember, like you said, Thomas, is the image that accompanied the facts. So that's a trigger for me to remember it. And like Jean, like you're saying, with some examples of actual court records, that seems like it would be entirely doable. Again, of course, there's the labor of love of the person who's curating it and making sure it's a good example, but then including those as a copy, as a diagram insert, so that the students have that as a part of the packet. It just seems like it's such a powerful learning tool. And then perhaps when these things get ultimately adopted, and it's not such a radical idea that we are creating these materials that are sort of living and they're continuously evolving, that we're you know, there are no limits. We could include multimedia. We could include, you know, a video link to something that's happening in a courtroom that students could then learn from that and review it. And so it seems like the boundaries would be limitless once we overcome this hurdle of, you know, obviously having the funds and people having the opportunity to create it. And of course they need the space and encouragement to do that. And then, you know, people getting over the fact that it really isn't so radical to think that students might learn better in a variety of ways and not just from a traditional print casebook. I don't know. I mean, this is it's a pretty exciting topic. I am excited to see what new forms the two of your books might take in the future. So
I just wanted to also jump in and name a couple of resources for folks who are interested. One is the Center for Academic Excellence, and the staff there helps faculty to choose online platforms. They help with the actual development if there need be. And when you come to the point of which, where will I store this OER, or how do I ensure its continuity over time? The UGA Libraries has a digital repository. At this particular moment in time, it's called Athenaeum at UGA, but we may be looking at changing its name. But just keep in mind, and you can contact me if you're interested in having you know, a hosted solution for the OER continuing on, and definitely using a Creative Commons license would be the best way to go with that.
I might just jump in quickly. You know, Marianne's point makes me just brings to mind just the fact that this is such a team effort at UGA to create materials like this. I wouldn't want any of my colleagues to listening to this to think that This was something that I created on my own, far from it. So, you know, everything from advice that I got from folks in the admin side on applying for the grant in the first place and speaking to Jean and getting her advice on the application materials. But then like once I'd got the grant, even then, it was still very much a team effort. I worked with student RAs on the kind of like case selection and excerpting process. I worked with Stephen and other folks at the law library on sourcing those documents in a way that was going to, you know, leave us clear to edit them in certain ways. I worked with the Center of Teaching and Learning to identify somebody who I could talk to about content warnings and the nature of content warnings that might be good in a casebook. I worked with my administrative support here on like certain formatting features. And my dogs have been, you know, a great help to me as well, as you can hear in the background. But no, it's a real team effort, and there are so many great resources at UGA for pretty much any question that you have on this stuff.
I want to piggyback on what Thomas was saying, is that this is something that is a team effort from inception to end. And like Thomas, I had tons of different people I worked with. I mean, Stephen, you held my hand through, no, you will not be violating copyright if you do this, to I was able to hire students through using the grant. So I was able to employ a student who needed a job. He was either going to go work at Waffle House or be able to help me with this. And he was able to work with me doing this. And it was really, really cool. And so, but I also reached out to friends who are practicing attorneys, and I reached out to other students I had connected with, and reached out to other faculty, Stephen again, who all proofread what I wrote and gave me tons of feedback on, does this make sense? Is this connecting? Is it all flowing? I mean, I think that each edition went through 10 different readers, and people have been so willing to just give their time to do this because they think it's important for students to have something that they can learn from and aren't worried about the cost of it. And that anytime we make this movement towards valuing students and prioritizing their full experience on campus, it's amazing how many people are willing to jump in and help.
I just wanted to jump in again and say that I'm also a satisfied customer of OERs. Having gone through the Master of Law program at UGA, I was a student with Joe Miller in his IP survey course. And he actually did use some Fora Press. I don't know if you all have heard of it, but his IP casebook was through there, and I printed the entire book for like $25 and instead of $225, you know. So I think the law community is definitely recognizing the importance of this, along with many other, you know, pockets on campus.
My like lingering question is for all of you, what can we do? What can we say to the faculty member who might be hesitant to apply for this grant or to create their own? You know, what would be the sort of the encouraging words to say, like, it's okay, you can do it? How do we approach that conversation with other faculty? I mean, obviously, I think a good first step is this video itself. You know, hopefully we will share this widely with many faculty members. But beyond that, I mean, how do you start that conversation? What would it have taken for you before you hit this point, something that you have learned but you didn't know before?
Go ahead, Jean.
I think that the biggest thing I learned is you've already done so much of the work to put the casebook together or to put the materials together through teaching and through your notes and through how you've thought of things. So you're not actually starting at ground zero. You're just organizing what you know in a different way. And then the other thing is that, so I've done the legal writing one and I've done law excerpts for criminal law drafting. So I've done 2 different versions, 2 different everything. I really think that I am a much, much better instructor for having gone through this process, which to me is worth all the work that it is if I'm clearly conveying information and interacting with my students on a daily basis for doing this process.
Yeah, I'd basically echo that. I mean, I think all of my colleagues, I'm sure, don't need convincing on the benefits of this type of approach. They care about affordability as well. They care about all of the same things that Gina and I have been talking about. But it can be a daunting prospect to put together the materials. And it was, I think in many ways less work than I expected it to be, but then in other ways more work than I expected it to be, or like different types of work than I expected it to be. But one is there is a ton of great administrative and institutional support here to help our faculty who want to do this. That makes it a little less daunting. And then, like Jean said, like I feel like I've put in work on the front end now that is going to pay huge dividends going forward for me in terms of how I teach my class. And the way in which having some ownership over my own materials will encourage me to stay engaged with what is in the materials, I think will be a really just useful way for me to remain engaged with what's going on in tort law. What can I just tweak a little bit to be able to fit this new thing in? How do I want to actually, emphasize this particular point that my students year on year ask me about in a slightly different way? And I can actually do something about that doesn't involve like, all right, now I need to go out and find some other material to be able to teach this and rearrange my class around in some way. There's just a lot more control you can have over it. So work at the front end for sure. But I really do anticipate that, this is going to pay dividends quite quickly.
I want to add one thing to this, which is that aside from obtaining the grant and creating your own materials, of course, one of the benefits of adopting OER is your ability to reuse and remix things that other people have used, right? That's one of the additional attractions that we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about, which is that there exists a world of OER stuff and new stuff being developed all the time that you can use, and you can use it in whole or in part, and you can change it to fit your own needs, and you don't have to worry about any access barriers to it. And I'll just throw in for my undergraduate class, I have no course book. I just use entirely open materials that I've gotten from elsewhere. And even though I haven't developed my own course book for this class, effectively, from both of what you've been saying, my syllabus almost exists as its own OER course book, right? Just not curated OER materials, just not as a sort of formalized book. And so I think that's something that we just want to remember again, that when we're talking about OER, we're not just talking about creating our own thing and taking on this effort and cost onto ourselves, but we're also talking about sort of engaging with a community of OER. And so, for instance, Thomas mentioned that he hopes that people adopt this, right? But they don't have to adopt his book once it comes out, but they don't have to adopt it in entirety. Maybe it doesn't make sense for their class as it is. But again, the benefit is that they can take what they need from it and reuse it, and not have to worry about access problems.
Absolutely. And I, it's maybe too optimistic of me, but, I really do feel like there is a way in which the UGA law faculty could get brought into this, or the torts community in a certain way, because I don't include products liability in my torts book because I don't teach products liability, right? Don't tell anybody. But there are wonderful people on our faculty who are really experts in products liability. And if they ever wanted to, take on this casebook and then add their own section on that, then great, they can do that. Or somebody else who is an expert in some of the more procedural issues surrounding tort law, they could go and do that. This is by no means revolutionary or even close to being my idea, right? There have been some great initiatives within the Legal Academy already to do this. I think of the H2O project up at Harvard that does this through a kind of digital, online forum where professors can submit excerpted cases, and then you can kind of choose your own, I think they even call them playlists, to create a syllabus. And that sort of model, I think, it can just be really valuable either within an institution like UGA or more broadly within the Legal Academy. And using something like Creative Commons obviously enables that in a great way.
Thomas, we have not mentioned at all the fact that you basically wrote my writing for exams chapter with your TA last year, because I came to you and I was like, hey, I don't teach doctrinal classes, so I don't grade exams. I want to put together a chapter on writing for exams. Will you team with me? And you were gracious enough to say yes. So,
well, you've just really oversold my own personal contribution, because as I recall it, you wrote an excellent chapter, and Courtney, my wonderful TA, also contributed hugely to it. And I was able to try and add some things on the margins. But yeah, we co-authored this great chapter. It's now in Jean's book. It's in my case book as an appendix. And we use that. I use that in a way to kind of try and tell my 1L students, right? There's like a whole lot of mystery surrounding the 1L exam, and I can't demystify it entirely just through these few pages, but I can at least try and break it down. I'm not trying to hide the ball here. I want you to write good exams. I want you to write well when you're in my class, and here's my view on it with some expertise from one of the best taught students that is currently enrolled in the school, and our great legal writing professor, and let's just come together and try and do this. And so that type of collaboration is made possible because of the way that we approach the open access model.
This seems like a perfect moment to say, this is sort of piggybacking off of Marianne's mention of resources that we have below this video. And when we share it, I will include links to the resources that she has talked about. I also think this is a great time to plug our open educational resources guide. You can find that at libguides.law.uga.edu/OER, and I'll put that link under the video as well. It links to a very robust and highly collaborative set of resources that are all open and free for our faculty and students to use. It is not all open access. And as we've talked about, there's different flavors or there's different Creative Commons licenses you can use. There's different platforms that are out there. Many of the resources, I know Thomas mentioned the H2O site at Harvard. That is one of many sites that we have here. The Semaphore Press that Marianne shared, that Joe Miller has published on, another member of our faculty. That resource is also linked here, as well as Joe's own casebook through that. So we have kind of gathered our own faculty. We've gathered, I believe it is more than 200 casebooks and increasing all the time, as well as like some key resources that just take you to the sites that would list some of these. And you can search by subject for more than 30 legal subjects. So again, this resource itself was highly collaborative. I know Stephen had RAs working on this project, and I worked on this project. So we hope that anyone who is listening, if you didn't already know about that guide, check it out. Jean's book is there. Thomas's will be there. And, there's so many resources there, several of which we've mentioned. And then I don't know, I feel like it's time for like some other final thoughts from people, but I guess that was sort of my final thought. I really wanted to plug our guide and make sure that if you've been listening to this and any of the things that several people talked about, you were curious about, including a link to the grant, you can find it in that guide.
I think that's a great button on the end there, Rachel. Thanks. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to talk to us today. Go away.
Really happy open access weekend.
Yeah, happy open access week.